I'm gonna let y'all in on a little secret. The technical interview process sucks. I remember my worst interview ever. I walked into a room full of 5 men, and I was told to stand in front of the whiteboard while they all sat down in chairs, and they didn't even introduce themselves. They instantly started grilling me about Java. What's the difference between overloading and overriding? And I kind of just stood there and looked at them because I was interviewing for a front-end developer role. But they were asking me about Java. So needless to say, that interview very quickly deteriorated and I left feeling absolutely shitty about myself. And I felt really shitty about myself for a long time. But the worst part was that I already worked for this company. So I'd already passed the technical interview process to get into this company. I was just trying to switch teams. The technical interview process sucks for everyone, and yet no one discusses it, and I'm not super sure why. I think it probably stems from feeling discouraged and feeling really badly about yourself, the imposter syndrome that comes along with having an interview and not knowing the answers to any of the questions, not even knowing where to start with a lot of these whiteboarding questions. Because guess what? Most of them are not going to be relevant questions to the job that you're applying for. Now, I know I am privileged in the sense that I went to school for computer science, so I got to learn things like big O notation, all these sorting and searching algorithms, and all of these things. But many people applying for development jobs, especially in front-end development roles, do not have that same education. They're not taught about performance runtime. They're not taught about how to tell if a binary search tree is balanced or what an abstract syntax tree is. And yet, for some reason, they're being asked questions rooted in computer science concepts. And so many people struggle, many developers struggle to learn these computer science concepts when where are they gonna go to learn these things? There are some online courses, but let's be real for a second, computer science is freaking hard. Okay, so learning about recursion and big O notation and all of these other concepts is not easy. And it's especially not easy if you've got a family at home or you're working a full job or maybe 2 full jobs. When are you gonna find time to study? And so I knew that the technical interview process was broken, but it wasn't until earlier this week, actually, that I found out just how broken it truly is. I ran a survey with over 300 respondents in one day, and the results, I wish I could say that they shocked me, but I think deep down I knew that this process is internally broken. Because what I'm gonna share with you today will indicate the fact that no matter how much experience you have in this industry, your imposter syndrome when it comes to interviews never subsides for most people. So let's kind of jump right in and take a look at the technical interview process in the eyes of the community, and we'll see what y'all said, and let's maybe talk about how we can fix it. Okay, so let's talk about the survey results and the state of technical interviews in 2020. The first question I asked was, how many years of professional software development experience do you have? And I was a little bit surprised by this. I kind of expected more beginners to take this, but it turns out the majority of respondents were people with 10 plus years of experience. And so I find this extremely interesting to me in terms of the following results, because you would think people with more experience would be more comfortable in technical interviews, and we're gonna see that this is not the case. So given these kind of like demographics in terms of experience, years of experience, how many technical interviews have you gone through as a candidate? The majority of people have only been through about 0 to 5. It was very closely followed by about 6 to 10. And then we can see, actually there's a really good portion of people who've gone through over 30 interviews. And I do think that 2020 sucked. I don't think that's a secret. Especially because many people lost their jobs in 2020, and getting hired when everyone else in your industry is also trying to find a job was extremely tricky. And so that's kind of where I feel like the 30 plus interview responses came from. And so I asked, what is the most nerve-wracking part of a technical interview? And honestly, I was a little bit surprised by these results because I was expecting the top anxiety-inducing part of the process to be the on-site interview. I find those to be the most strenuous. It's generally a full day of interviews at the company's office where you're whiteboarding and talking to people and all of these things. But actually, people were most anxious about the coding challenge. So this will typically be your first interview after the recruiter phone call, where they will either send you a challenge on, I don't even know what the platforms are called, but like an online platform that's timed, like you have about 30 or 45 minutes to complete an assessment online, or often it'll be like remote coding with someone through Zoom or Google Hangouts or another online meeting tool. So that kind of surprised me, and I'm thinking it's probably because to get to an on-site interview, a company really has to be interested in you as a candidate, and most candidates don't make it to the on-site interview process. So perhaps that's where that came from. But the take-home project came in third. So these are generally a scoped project completed again in your free time. They'll try to time box them to like 4 to 6 hours. But this was really interesting to me because I very much enjoy take-home projects. That being said, in the past I have had projects that I've actually sent back to the recruiter and said, hey, I appreciate your time. I'm gonna be honest, my skills are not where they need to be to complete this. Let's follow up in a year. And there was no shame in that. If you get a take-home assessment and you know you can't do it, whether you don't have the time for it or your skills are not where you think they should be in order to be comfortable completing it, there's no shame in writing back and saying, I just don't have time, I'm sorry, let's follow up in a year. And many companies don't do take-home assessments. They've kind of been all over the place. I've had a few. With Spotify, I didn't have a take-home assessment. With Google, I did, and I actually had to present it to a team member. So that was interesting. But I personally like them because it's less stressful for me. And then last, it was just the application process. So, filling out these long-ass forms takes time. It can be nerve-wracking, especially if English is not your first language, which is something we'll get to a little bit later in this as well. And then I followed up and I said, well, why is this the most nerve-wracking part? I'm genuinely curious. So for the coding challenge, people do not like the exam-like conditions, and I totally agree with this. I always failed exams in school because they were timed. Generally, these have a short time limit, and generally they will have like a countdown timer going, and it just induces anxiety. There's nothing natural about this. In no way, shape, or form does this indicate how you'll be working with a company. So yeah, it doesn't usually mimic a real world problem. And there's a lot of pressure to perform on the spot. And realistically, most of us cannot do that. And not only that, we've got this short time limit, but there are so many possibilities that you can explore when you're looking for a solution. And sometimes it's really hard to focus in on one of them, especially if you feel like you keep going down one path, or like what happens if you go down one path and then you realize halfway through answering it that it's not the most optimal solution. Do you start over? Or do you try to validate this path that you've already gone down? For the on-site interview, people were really concerned about the unfamiliar environment, which is very true. I always get so anxious like showing up to an on-site when we were allowed to travel, of course. I had my on-site interview with Google in Munich, and I remember, I stayed in a hotel the night before, but I was just so anxious. I'm like, where do I go when I get there? I have no idea. This campus is massive. Where am I supposed to be? And not only that, it's an unfamiliar environment. So I'm just not comfortable writing on a whiteboard if I don't know the people and I don't know the place. And typically these are either a full day or a half day of interviews. I think, with Google, I had like 4 or 5 interviews on site, and it requires you to be on point for hours on end. And this is, again, not natural. We should be taking breaks. So that's very tricky. For those of us who are non-native English speakers, I don't know why I said us. I am a native English speaker. But I speak a few other languages, and I can tell you right now, if I had to conduct an interview in a second or third language, I couldn't. I'm not proficient enough to do that. And so please, if you are an interviewer watching this, if you have a candidate who does not speak native English, please be patient with them, and please never make fun of their English skills. I don't understand why you would make fun of anyone speaking a second language. Do you know how scary it is to speak a second language and put yourself out there, and let alone in a professional setting where you're looking for a job? That's horrifying to me. But in any case, and then the last one is coding without a computer. Many companies nowadays actually would let you use a laptop. Like when I was at Google, they let me choose Whiteboard or like Chromebook. And so I started at the whiteboard and I kind of like did some pseudocode, and then I moved on to the Chromebook. So it used to be that you had to code at a computer, but I do think more companies are recognizing how artificial that is, and it's not practical. So hopefully they'll change that. And then I was curious, would you prefer a take-home coding project instead of a whiteboarding interview? Because I personally would. I would so much rather do a project for 4 to 6 hours and have no time pressure, get it done on my own terms, use my own tools, as opposed to staying in front of a random person and trying to pseudocode on a whiteboard. But it kind of surprised me that some people actually said no. So yes, most people did say yes. Overwhelmingly, most people said they would prefer a take-home test because it's less stressful. No one's watching. Again, like being able to use my own tools. I don't feel micromanaged. And generally it does help your confidence because it's on your own terms. But think about the fact that take-home projects, unless they're paid, are free labor. And this is completely unethical to me, especially, I mean, for anyone. I don't care the circumstances. If you're not paying someone for a take-home assessment, especially if you're using this code in production, which I have seen happen, and that is absolutely unethical. You should never be asking candidates to complete a take-home assessment or solve a question for you if it's a question that you're trying to solve within your organization. This is absurdly unethical. I can't even begin to explain. I did have one interview though with Gatsby where they paid me. Well, they offered to pay me for my take-home portion of my interview, and it wasn't a strenuous take-home. It was very practical, which I enjoyed. But the fact that they offered to pay for that, pay for my services, my time, that's what all companies should be doing. And then I was curious, what would actually cause you to pull out of an interview process? Because I've had instances where I've pulled out of interview processes myself. I don't care how much revenue you have. I don't care how much growth that you're accruing as a startup. If you're an asshole to me, I'm not gonna wanna work with you. I'm gonna pull out of your interview process. And I did this the other day. Many people would pull out for these Google style brain teasers. Yeah, I mean, if you're just trying to trick your candidates or see how they think, I don't think that's a great practice. I much prefer the practice of solving real world problems that they would encounter on the day job, A, because they're practical and you can actually see the skills that they would bring to the team, but B, the candidates themselves will get a feel for whether or not this is the type of work that they want to be doing at all. And it would actually save both of you a lot of headache, I think. A lack of process clarity, not knowing how many interviews there are or what things you should be studying. I mean, let's be real for a second. Like, the interview process is so incredibly massive. What should I as a front-end developer focus on? Do I focus on studying data structures and algorithms and computer science concepts? Or do I focus on HTML, CSS, JavaScript, accessibility, performance, all of these other areas that will directly impact my job as a front-end developer? This is a huge one. And this is why I pulled out of an interview process with a company that I had previously very much respected. If you have an ego, if you are disrespectful, if you are racist or sexist, people are not going to want to work for you. If you are exhibiting these behaviors in your interview process, do you think people are really going to want to work with you full time? No. And this is a big one as well. If the questions that you're asking your candidates are not relevant to the job, it's just, people are not going to be as invested. And very simply, if you don't really know what you're looking for skill set wise, if you have a front-end development role posted and you're questioning your candidates about MySQL, you might want to get your shit together. And if you've got too many interviewers in the room, it's extremely intimidating. It's much better to approach this from a collaborative standpoint of let's solve this problem together, let's have this be a conversation and not a please define the difference between overloading and overriding in Java. Those never sit well. But I didn't want to just be pessimistic, and so I turned it around with question 7 and I said, think back to your best interviewing experience. What made this so great? And one of the biggest sentiments was patience. Having a patient interviewer is invaluable because this is a high stress situation. Often people are searching for jobs not because they want to, but because they have no other choice. Maybe they were fired, maybe they were in a harmful situation at their current workplace and they didn't feel safe. But most people do not interview for the freaking fun of it. So having a patient interviewer is extremely important. And this kind of goes back to one of the previous points of having this be a conversation instead of an interview makes all the difference in the world. I chose to work at Spotify because it was a conversation. They were real world questions and it was collaborative. And that process to me, the empathy and the humility that they had as a company interviewing me made me want to work with them. You know, I'm not going to rehash this. Relevant questions. At the end of the day, people want to know what kinds of things they'll be doing on the job, and they want to show you what they can do for you. They don't want to sit there and try to figure out binary search. And it really helps to have a recruiter who's very transparent about the expectations. So in every interview, what are the things I should be studying? I think it's really great when you give your candidates a guide or some kind of list of topics to study. So, you know, for front end, don't focus so much on React or Vue. Focus on the fundamentals of HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, right? If a recruiter came to me and said that, I would feel so much more at ease. So if you can do that, which you should be able to do, I don't see why you couldn't, highly recommend that. But I think the biggest thing is just see your candidates as human beings. You're not there to prove how smart you are as an interviewer. You are there to see if this candidate can help you build incredible products. And we're not just business assets, we're people with families, with feelings, with skills, with emotions. And you have to have empathy throughout this process. Because while we might be writing code that computers compile, humans are the ones digesting that code and interacting with it. And we all need to be empathetic, not just when we're building, but when we're interviewing. So I'm super excited to really dig into the technical interview process more and uncover what makes a great process. How can every company out there change their process so that it's enjoyable? You should have fun during your interviews. They don't need to be stressful, but we make them stressful because I feel like internally companies are trying to prove how smart they are. And, you know, I don't give a shit if you're a FANG company. I give a shit if you're a human being that recognizes intelligence inside of me and promise within me, and you're willing to help me grow as a developer, but also as a person. Those are the companies and the people that I want to work with. And I have finally found that at my current job, and I want all of you to find it too. And so I'm very much looking forward to creating more content about that technical interview process and, you know, republishing my book and publishing series of videos and a course that can help not just candidates learn these, you know, computer science skills that unfortunately you have to learn in this day and age right now because our interview process is so broken. But I also want this to be seen by employers looking to create a better process so that hopefully at some point candidates don't need to be taking the content that I'm producing and learning from it. I hope that happens. I hope that employers see some of these things that I'm discussing today, that we are discussing as a community, and they alter their processes so that they're not so computer science focused, so that the questions being asked are relevant, so that your candidates feel like this is a collaborative chance to see whether or not either party wants to work together. Because guess what? At the end of the day, an interview is a two-way conversation, and employers need to stop thinking about this as we know you want to work for us because we're great, so we're going to test you and see how much you can memorize. I mean, are you kidding me? No one wants to work for that. But unfortunately, a lot of times candidates or developers in general or people in general are stuck in roles that they hate, that they are not safe in. And this is what breaks my heart, is that people will stay in roles where they are actively being harmed because they're terrified of the interview process. And that, to me, is what tells our community that this process is broken, that we need to fix it. No one should have to accept a job offer for a job that they know they're going to hate, that they know they're not going to be accepted in, because they have no other choice, because they're scared of the interview process, because the process takes too long. But that's where we're at realistically as an industry. And so moving forward, I'm really excited to produce some content that I hope helps all of you feel more confident in your technical interviewing skills, because it's a skill. I think we forget that. Interviewing in and of itself is a skill alongside programming, right? We have to practice the art of interviewing, the art of communication. But I'm also looking forward to hopefully changing the way that employers run their interview process. so that all of us feel more comfortable interviewing and it's actually an enjoyable process and not one that we dread. I hate seeing people struggle. And I've received so many emails and so many messages from people feeling the sense of imposter syndrome at all stages of their career. And it's time that we start addressing these things and that we start fixing them and that we recognize that it's not us. We're not failures if we don't get past an interview. The companies have a long way to go to alter their interview processes, and I'm hoping that we can get there as an industry.